Today on the Partovi Effect, one of the most revealing moments in the history of vaccine science. And it didn't happen in a lab, and it did not happen at the CDC. My name is Mrs. Madi Partovi.
And I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
It happened in a room during a 9-hour deposition between Dr. Stanley Plotkin and Aaron Siri. Now, mind you, Dr. Stanley Plotkin is known as the godfather of vaccines. And he has consulted with the majors, like Merck and GlaxoSmithKline. And when asked by Aaron Siri about conflicts of interest, Dr. Stanley Plotkin didn't seem to think that receiving millions of dollars, for his consulting efforts, he didn't think that, receiving those funds really affected the outcomes or what he said or how he consulted with these companies.
So he didn't see the conflict of interest that would have been obvious to a, second grader.
Or to, all the parents out there who are following the instructions of their general practitioners, their doctors, to get vaccinated on the new schedule, by the way. So Dr. Stanley Plotkin wrote one of the most major vaccine textbooks. He was also involved in shaping this modern schedule of childhood vaccines. I know that this information just doesn't blow your brain apart, but
No, the way my mind works is I'm like me, I'm a detail oriented person, so I'm like looking for details. I'm like, what was the name of the textbook? Those are the kind of questions that come up for me.
Okay.
And I know you may not know that off the top of your head, but that's how my brain works.
Being the godfather of vaccinology, he is the go-to person.
Okay.
That these pharmaceutical companies are going to when developing their vaccines. And they're paying him, how much did he get? Aaron Siri asked him, did you get more than $1 million for, developing the rubella, the MMR vaccine? I think he said somewhere around there. And then Aaron Siri asks him, may it have been more? Plotkin says, I don't remember. And he tells him also that he doesn't even look at his income tax statements. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then Aaron
I have
Siri,
accountants for that, right?
Siri tries to remember him. Well, your colleague received $6 million. Do you think you received somewhere around there? He doesn't recall. Doesn't look at his income statements.
Well, he's been coached by his attorneys to say, I don't remember, unless he remembers precisely the amount. So if he doesn't remember it down to the penny, he's going to say, I don't remember. Because that's what attorneys coach people to do when they're being deposed.
So I'm inviting all parents to actually, and I can put the links to the deposition. It is mind-blowing the way that, first of all, I commend Aaron Siri for doing his due diligence. This man is extraordinary. Okay, and he wasn't born with a torch saying that, I'm going to depose these vaccinologists, the major ones. But he couldn't unsee information that he was seeing when he was doing all this research.
So why was he doing the research? Who is he? I mean, I know you've mentioned him in previous episodes, but for people who this is the first episode they're seeing, I'm wondering if you could...
Yeah, so he's a lawyer.
See, I know you've been reading his book, but they don't know you've been reading his book.
Okay, I've been reading his book, Vaccines, Amen.
Okay, there we go.
Okay? And I'm through maybe the first 3 chapters, and it's absolutely... Everybody needs to know this. This particular deposition happened in January of 2018, in January 11th, 12th of 2018. And this information is just slowly starting to surface. You know, and it's been accessible because we have something in the U.S. called the Freedom of Information Act. You know, it's been accessible, but who's gonna dig? Who's gonna dig, right? Since I was a kid, I've been known as a digger. Okay. And I want to get this information out. I want to get this information out to discerning parents because my brother is about to have a baby, you know?
Right.
So I have a stake in it.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're describing is really a one brick in a very large wall, which is the perverse incentives between those who study vaccines and those who sell vaccines and those who produce vaccines, and the fact that this entire industry has basically been built up as a for-profit industry. To me, I think it's important. To me, it's all like, okay, this is interesting data that just sort of reinforces what I already know. And that's kind of why it doesn't blow my mind as much as I think it blows your mind. Because to me, I look at things very simply and I look at the big picture and I kind of pull back and I say, okay, well, who is making vaccines? Is it vaccine manufacturers who only make vaccines, or is it companies that also sell other things? Oh, it's pharmaceutical companies that also sell drugs to sick people. Okay, so if these are mandatory shots that are given to all children from the time they're born until the time they're go off to college, do they have an incentive as a company to give you a shot that makes you not noticeably sicker, but a little bit sicker, and maybe not to the point where you're going to be, it's going to be super obvious to everyone, but like maybe for people who are extra discerning and really looking at the data over longitudinal studies, looking over the course of decades, maybe they start to pick up the pattern, but then they're going to say, oh, correlation, not causation. There's been a lot of other changes and advancements and pollutants and other toxins in the environment. May or may not have actually been our products. But, so they'll insert just enough doubt to keep the true believers on board. But then at the end of the day, it's like, well, but what's your incentives? Is your incentive to have a healthier child that isn't going to need your drugs when they're an adult? Or is your incentive to have a less healthy child that ends up becoming a sick adult that now is addicted to more of your treatments? And ask yourself, how has the pharmaceutical company changed in size in the last 80 years as the vaccine schedule has gone up? Again, everybody who's a science-minded person is going to say correlation but not causation. I'm unconvinced. All right, fine. My question to you is, how many correlations will it take for you to be convinced? Because I heard something really good. There was somebody who was talking about conspiracy theories, and basically when you have to start taking something as more than just a conspiracy theory. And basically they point to two factors. Number one is the motivation, and right now we're talking about motivation. And number two is the means, right? You have to have the means and the motivation. So we've talked about why these companies are motivated to have sicker adults and to produce a society of sick people, right? But do they have the means to do it? Well, not only do they have the means to do it, but they've ensured through legislation that they will never be sued for doing what they're doing. Okay? So unlike, for example, and I'm just going to create this because this has been coming up a lot this week, with regard to the Iran conflict, and I promise we'll get back to vaccines. But, people just love to conspiracy theorize around the state of Israel, which, makes up about 1% of the GDP of the entire world, and claim that state is now somehow controlling the number one most powerful country in the world, that somehow they have bought off with their very limited resources. This tiny little country has managed to buy off all of our politicians and, control them to such a point that they're going to be starting wars over whatever Israel wants. It's like, never did they consider the more logical conclusion, which is that the state of Israel is essentially a client state of the United States, and they're, our greatest friend in the Middle East, our number one non-NATO ally, and we want to help them because actually they're like a colony of the United States. But it's like, oh, he said the word colony, how dare he? But it's like, in reality, we live in the American empire. People need to get used to that reality, The fact that they're want to pretend like that we're this isolationist republic that can just be on our own and continue to have the quality of life we have and the low prices that we enjoy and the freedom that we enjoy, and we can just do that while everybody else can have the same thing. Well, they can have some facsimile of it, and we can certainly move it toward that direction. But the reality of the matter is that that can only happen if we actually protect our interests geopolitically. And the way we do that is by taking out those who wish to do us the most harm and who have the greatest capacity to do so. And so, it's very clear to me that's what we're doing in Iran. But people who sit there and look at this question, they say, oh, well, Israel, the Jews, I put that in quotes for those who are just listening, they must be underneath this. This must be their thing, that they're causing this. It's like, okay, I could see why you might think that they have the motivation to do that. That it's like, oh yeah, well, we want to be protected. We want to be safe. We don't want Iran to attack us with ballistic missiles. Logical, right? We would want that, right? But do they have the means? Do they have the means to really take over, the entire country and all of the leaders and, corrupt every single one of them and buy them all out, to the point where this one country that produces 1% of the GDP of the world is going to be able to do that? To me, it's just not plausible. And so, unlike the vaccine industry, where they have plenty of money and they have all of our legislators in their pockets. Look, I'm not saying AIPAC doesn't also, but here's the thing. At the end of the day, there's a big difference between trust the experts, we're doing good things for humanity, right? Which is what all these pharmaceutical companies claim to do, right? And holding themselves out as being that, and a foreign country, essentially, that is a tiny country, that is a client state, essentially, of the United States, that is somehow going to come back and control our politicians. It just doesn't, it does not pass the basic sniff test to me of believability. And I also, just on another note, which is slightly tangential, but not really, I think it's also important to be careful about how much we go down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Because I think that while it is true that there are things that we don't know, and there are things that are obviously hidden from view, and there are things that we're just now learning about, there's an easy tendency, as one sees maybe one or two of these things, usually in your area of expertise, whatever that may be, to think, oh, gee, that must mean all conspiracy theories are true, and that you can't trust anybody or anything. And I think that is a dangerous mindset to have. And I think it's important to stay grounded in reality and realize that humans are pretty dumb. Dr. D'Adamo loves to talk about this. He says humans on a global scale, the majority of humans, we're not that smart, And so the reality, even the smart ones, even the ones like me and him who think we're smart, right? And other people think are smart, right? We're really not that smart. So the idea that we're going to be able to have these, international global organizations that are manipulating every single little aspect of our lives down to putting 5G receivers into pharmaceuticals and vaccines, and so that we can mind control people. I mean, I've heard the most bizarre theories out there. And I guess, my point in all of this is just to say, I think there's a tendency to lump in what you're saying about vaccines with a lot of the other cuckoo ideas out there. But the reality of the matter is, the more you explore this, the more you realize it's not cuckoo at all. In fact, it's staring you right in the face. It's just like people used to think, oh, there's no reason to wash your hands before surgery. That's ludicrous. That's my favorite example, right? It's a ludicrous idea. Or, oh my God, you have an ulcer, you should just take some, acid blocking drugs. You should take an antacid, right? Stop eating such rich foods. No, now we know ulcers are caused by H. pylori bacteria overgrowth. So we do antibiotics to treat ulcer. Just like now we wash hands before surgery because we know that actually it improves outcomes, right? So I think if you really start to see, and you can go back and read my Substack about how the trade-off in terms of chronic disease with vaccination, and just the tiny bit of evidence we have, which of course has been mostly, suppressed, is enough for me to give me pause and say, well, gee, maybe we made a mistake here. And by we, I don't mean the pharmaceutical companies. I think they're working as intended. I think they're doing what they're supposed to do, which is make profit for their shareholders. But maybe we as a society have made a mistake by putting the development of products that are supposed to make us healthier in the hands of people whose primary interest and obligation to their shareholders, fiduciary responsibility, in fact, to their shareholders, is to make money.
Let me make you, well.
I know, it's like I took you way out here and then I brought you back, didn't I?
Well,
I love doing that.
If you were a leading vaccinologist and you were asked to, create a vaccine for either, COVID or for MMR, and, I eventually hand you a check for $6 million. I say, do what it is you need to do, to make this safe and effective. And during the entire deposition, Dr. Plotkin could not supply the evidence that Aaron Siri is asking for to really prove safe and effective. Safe and effective.
Well, I think you have the problem there, which is that COVID-19 was not a natural virus, right? It didn't naturally evolve. So it's kind of a unique case, is what I would say. Because by virtue of the way that it evolved under the directed kind of pressure-related circumstances of the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab, it had particularly toxic components that weren't going to make it amenable to any vaccine, or frankly, weren't going to make it very friendly to human beings, period. Which we've seen with the long COVID and vaccinosis, really tracking each other. Vaccinosis just being the medical term to describe vaccine injury. Now, if you're asking me about vaccines in general, how might I create them? First of all, I wouldn't say give me $6 billion up front. I think that's a huge conflict of interest. But I think you need some money, obviously, to run the process. But at the end of the day, it's sort of like I'm a big believer in getting paid for results and paying people for results. And at the end of the day, you have to do placebo-controlled, double-blinded trials so you understand the actual risks. Just the simple way that we administer vaccination through injection, I think, is wild. It's like if you want to expose someone to a particular antigen, you need to do it either in a mucous membrane, which is eyes, ears, nose, mouth, genitals. You're not going to do genitals, but you know what I mean. The best thing, I think, is the nose. And there's the nasal spray vaccines. But you want to use basically inactivated virus. In other words, virus that's not going to be able to make anybody sick. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. One is by using dead virus, which is not quite as effective. Or doing like an adenovirus vector where you take like a harmless cold vaccine or a harmless cold virus and put some viral proteins in there, which is how I think it's called Novovirus. Norovax. What was the one that came out most recently? The COVID vaccine that was the more recent COVID vaccine?
Yeah, it sounds
something like that. Anyway, That one I think was the closest to that. And in fact, initially I was telling people before we knew that the spike protein was the mechanism by which COVID exerted its cytotoxicity, I was saying, well, look, this mRNA is a new platform, new technology. Let's not jump on board and be the first round of guinea pigs. In fact, let's wait for the more traditional form to come out, which is what I was encouraging people to do. But by the time that would have come out, we knew that it was the spike protein that was the problem. So any spike protein-based vaccine was going to present a lot of the same risks as long COVID, as the COVID virus does. But sometimes in a more concentrated form, because with COVID virus, sometimes you get mild cases and sometimes you get more severe cases. And in the more severe cases, maybe the amount of spike protein you get from a vaccine will be less. But the percentage of cases that are very severe are maybe 5%. For the other 95%, they would be better off getting COVID than the vaccine. So it's a little tricky, right, in terms of figuring out the math. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the vaccine is a little bit of a jokey idea when we have effective early treatment, which we've had since, we've had really effective early treatment using hydroxychloroquine since about March of 2020. It's just that they suppressed that information. There was a fire, an accidental fire at the main hydroxychloroquine producing facility. Do you remember this? In 2020, I think it was it must have been April, May, June, somewhere in that time of 2020, there was a big fire. And that was where most of the American supply of hydroxychloroquine came from. And and then we've known ivermectin was really the single most effective agent at any stage of the disease since about, I want to say, August of 2020. There was emerging studies already even at that time. But you had to be paying attention, which most people weren't. Because most people were just waiting to be told what to do by the authorities, and the public health authorities during that time were a total disaster because they had been in on the creation of the virus. And I wonder if they might not have actually been using it as some sort of an experiment or an opportunity to make money from a vaccine. Either way, I'm not sure.
I just wanted to say, that started as a conspiracy theory. And I also want to mention that today...
Well, it still is a little bit, because there's no way we're ever going to know the truth.
True. Okay.
I mean, the part about the timing being... the question of whether it was controlled release, it's suspicious, right? Because there was that whole... I always forget the name of it, but there was that meeting that they had in August of 2019 where they discussed the response to a global coronavirus pandemic and what they would do. And it was basically the COVID playbook that they had planned out 6 months in advance.
That was today, 6 years ago, by the way.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go. So, I think that whether it was in fact a controlled release or whether there was just a lot of coincidences that were kind of sketchy, I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that. But regardless, we do know that, EcoHealth Alliance was involved in the creation of the virus, and, Fauci funded that. And, to me, he should be in jail for the rest of his life. But it seems like that the auto pen saved him.
I wanted to circle back to...
Go ahead.
So none of this information that, I'm reading surprises me. I just want to be clear. What I am excited about is that it is sound. There's plenty of evidence. It's beautifully wrapped. And here's where you could go. These government websites where you could do your own damn research. Mm-hmm. I think that's so exciting. And I think that's something that everybody should know that they have access to. Not just following their pediatricians. Okay, your kid's due for these 4 or 5 vaccines. Okay.
Right. Well, and pediatrics is tough because they're very heavily influenced by the vaccine manufacturers throughout their training. I mean, from the very beginning of a pediatrics residency, it's just, it's drilled into your head. Like the equivalent, it's funny, I like the title Vaccines Amen, because it really points to the religious element of it. It's like, in the same way as I would imagine certain aspects of, Christian dogma are just repeated on an almost daily basis for people who are in seminary, I would imagine it's the same for pediatricians, to the point where it seems almost alien to them by the time they get out of that training, that anybody might question the safety and efficacy of vaccination. So, yep, I have compassion for that. I do. All right. Well, ready to move on to another topic, or anything else you want to say about that?
No, I'm going to share as I continue reading the book.
Okay, great. But in the meantime, Aaron Siri, Vaccines Amen, you're recommending it.
Yeah, and actually reading through the deposition. Holy moly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there are safer ways to produce vaccines. But, you have to do double-blind, placebo-controlled. And a placebo is saline, right? A placebo is a sugar pill, not the vehicle that we're going to just leave the antigen out. Because it's the vehicle that we suspect where all the toxicity is. The aluminum adjuvant and the different preservatives and that kind of thing. It's like that's where we expect that a lot of that cumulative toxicity over the course of 70 different shots comes from. So,
and was Dr. Plotkin able to furnish these studies?
No, because they don't exist, right? And RFK Jr. has been talking about that for decades, and those of us who listen to him know that. And I mean, I think I looked for, and I think I could find like maybe one or two that were actually true placebo-controlled trials. One of which was actually the pediatric COVID study. But what was interesting about that study is that there were several people that were dropped from the study due to, they don't say why, but, we've heard reports basically from the people who did get dropped from the study that they had really dramatically horrible reactions. And some of those have become famous cases at this point. So,
well, then there you go.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic, one that I kind of think that we have tread very well over the course of the podcast at this point. If you are interested in this topic, by all means, please watch our previous episodes on it, because I think that you'll get a lot out of them. But I'm intrigued by your question of how I would do a better job creating a vaccine. I certainly would not want, if any of the project I was going to be involved in, I would not want the liability to be shielded, because if I would want that accountability, if we did something wrong, we want to be able to know and apologize for it and correct it and support the people who we'd hurt. I mean, my general policy as a physician is, if I make a mistake, the first words out of my mouth are going to be, "I'm sorry," and I made a mistake, and here's what I did wrong. And I think patients tend to really appreciate that level of honesty, because they know we're human and we're not perfect. And at the same time, I think we live in such a litigious society that people are afraid to say, physicians especially are afraid to use those words. But I would say, look, I think you're actually a lot more likely to get sued if you dig your heels in and claim, "I did nothing wrong, I followed the standard of care," right? Than to just say, "Well, gee, I really wish I hadn't done that. That was a mistake."
Or just to say, "That's not a vaccine reaction. No way it can be."
Yeah, just gaslight people, because that way you'll be protected from liability is what you're worried about. But I would just say, well, maybe we don't know, If you truly don't, because how could you know, You at the most you could say, well, they told us it was safe and effective, The experts, that's what they say, but I don't know. That would at least be intellectually honest.
Yeah, just doing the research on, the monies that Plotkin received, and then there's also a godmother of vaccinology too, and I will tell her story on another episode.
A later podcast. All right. Well, I have some things I wanted to get into, responses to a previous episode, but before we do that, did you want to share with me? You were going to share with me something about one of the boys.
Oh yes. So the questions I ask.
Sometimes she tells me, I have something I want to tell you about something that one of the boys said when I picked him up, but then she'll say, but you have to wait for the podcast. I'm like, what?
So currently there's this mineral that both boys are taking that they have named the yucky mineral because it's a tablet and, it's...
We will not name the brand. We do not want to besmirch anyone's product. But
Yucky mineral.
They don't prefer it.
And so
it's an excellent quality product, but
I'm coaxing the little one, to complete the task, complete the mission. And he's just making all these faces. Mommy, it's yucky. And so I totally get it's yucky, okay? And ever since you've come out of my womb, you've been a strong and mighty one. And you can do, since you are tiny, you can do so many things. You can do hard things. And he said, Mommy, what's a womb? So I patted my tummy, right? He said, is that how you say it in Spanish? Because, he takes Spanish class. But yes, womb is Spanish.
No. Oh, you said it was?
No, he asked me.
He's wondering whether tummy is, like womb is Spanish for tummy.
Yeah.
Oh. How cute.
It was very cute. And then he came home from school and I asked him what was good about today. Art. He loves art.
Yeah.
What was hard about today? The tomato. It was so frustrating. And he was making a very artistic tomato. And I forgot to sprinkle. I finished it. And then, oh, shoot, I forgot to sprinkle it. Oh, and it was so frustrating. And then, where did you see God today? And without the skip of a beat in my heart. And I've introduced the original Care Bears cartoon to them, right? So it's very hard. I'm very heartened that they have taken an interest in it and they watch it. We watch it together. And Ryan, our 8-year-old, asked me one day. He said, "I'm having a hard time identifying who the main character is in Care Bears, and it seems like it's Braveheart, but I really do think it's Tenderheart." Same thing with
I don't even know because I never watched Care Bears.
It is Tenderheart.
It is Tenderheart.
It's clearly Tenderheart.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like the linchpin,
I see.
right, of the whole Care Bear family.
I see.
and also, I showed him an episode of the original My Little Ponies. My favorite stuff when I was a kid. And he asked me the same thing.
All those girly cartoons.
Well, hey.
No, I'm teasing because I didn't get to watch any of them. I didn't even get. I used to sneak and watch G.I. Joe in the mornings before my parents would wake up.
I watched that too with my brother. Yeah, and I equally enjoyed it. I enjoyed He-Man and She-Ra. But these
I didn't watch any of those actually.
In Care Bears
those were too violent for my parents. Precious young prince.
There's a bad guy in Care Bears, No Heart.
Right.
Yeah, so they're beastly, so they're very much into that. It's very sweet, both an 8 and a 4-year-old just enjoying that together. So same thing about My Little Ponies.
I agree.
Who's the main character? Who do you think the main character is? I really don't know. So I would ask him questions. Well, what do you think? I think Bon Bon goes through deals with a lot. In some of the the cartoons. He said, yeah, I think Bonbon is the main character. So these discussions with our children are really lovely. Mm-hmm. And again, our 8-year-old son said that he saw God in his work cycle, which is an in-depth 2.5 hour, period where he goes to work on a particular subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's been working on a lot on money.
Imagine that.
Yeah. So it's just beautiful where he experiences God. I think that stillness, just like me when I'm working intensely on a project, that's where I experience the synchronicities and the messages from God and the guidance from God. So it's beautiful. It's beautiful that he experiences that.
Yeah. You're right. I'm getting hot. I'm taking off the jacket.
Okay.
All right. It's making me a little bit sleepy. Okay. All right. Anything else about the boys?
No, that was...
Okie doke. Well, I did want to address a little bit of pushback I got from some of our viewers here. So this is from our infamous Scott P., who's made some feedback in the past about our episode we did. It's entitled something about Beyond Epstein, where we get into a lot of child development concepts. And you had mentioned the idea of the shield wall.
The Viking shield wall.
The Viking
yes.
shield wall, right.
Uh-huh.
So he says, you distrust smartphones because you grew up in the analog world. The problem with that view is that the analog world is not coming back. This is similar to my views on alcohol. I saw kids in college that had no exposure to it, got their stomach pumped. So I generally think it's creating some type of shield wall is a terrible idea. So there's more, but I was going to pause there and see if you want to say anything now or have me finish this.
Go ahead and finish.
Okay. That's such a conservative viewpoint. We're going to shield our children. We're going to put a wall around them. We're going to build a bubble. We're going to protect them from the evils of society. That's not what Jesus would do. That doesn't fix the problem. When I was in college, there was a guy from another fraternity that drank so much and he went swimming and drowned. And you have to allow kids experience. I don't agree with the shield wall. Kids have to learn to face challenges, and they're perfectly capable of doing that when they're 10 or 11 years old, like my daughter could be driving right now if it wasn't for the law. Look what happened in the past with society. You know that by the time someone's 25 years old, they've only got 10 more years to live. I think he's talking about like historically, right? People had to grow up a lot faster and society developed just fine.
Okay, first,
I want to hear what you have to say before I say anything.
First, let's address the analogy of the shield wall. I don't think Mr. P really gets the shield wall that I'm talking about. I am talking about the Viking shield wall, okay? Where you're on the battlefield and, all the shields that they're holding, all the arrows are flying at them and they're all shield walls, so they all come together, so that they don't get killed.
Right.
Okay? So that is the correction in the analogy. It is not a bubble. It is not, keep the kid at home. It is not keep them away from all exposure. Okay? Absolutely not. Yeah, so I'm right there with him on that. That you shouldn't, that it's not optimal for you to shield your kid.
So explain to me then what the shield wall, distinguish that some more, because I think that's where he's confused.
Okay, so say that we are the strongest warriors, right?
Maybe give an example of what you're describing as the shield wall versus what maybe he's thinking You know,
Got it. Okay.
Like give something on the court.
Okay. All right. So in our family, us and the two boys, and our Great Dane, we're the most able, experienced, knowledgeable warriors, right? So let's put on that shield and like be right there in front of the battlefield.
Still, you're making an analogy, though. I mean, I want you to give an on-the-court example of your version of shield wall and contrast that with like what you've seen.
I'm about to go there.
Oh, okay,
Just
okay,
a
okay,
moment.
okay.
You will see in my analogy, it will unfold like a little onion for you.
Okay, great. I'm here for the
And
onion.
so here's an arrow, okay, and here it is social media or devices. Let's use one of his examples. Okay, devices, like the analog era is over, right? Very, very true. So here's an arrow, and it's an arrow clearly because of the evidence that exists. Okay, let's say AI, it affecting the brain, and the use of AI increasingly inhibits your creativity and you using your own brain. Okay, so that's one of the arrows. All right, shield wall. How do we deal with this? I just purchased Jonathan Haidt's Jonathan Haidt's book, The Amazing Generation. And oh my gosh, I'm moved when I say it because this 8-year-old kid, devoured that book and started to formulate his own ideas on the impact of social media and Instagram, and telling me, "Mommy, can you believe like the inventors of these social media platforms won't even let their own children use them? What does that say? That's crazy." Okay, so that's how it would. Okay, shield wall. Let's keep him from being, let's say, impacted by it in a way that is ultimately destructive. Let's say the most destructive thing is a kid, because of social media, takes her his own life. Right? There's many stories like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as the shield wall, I'm going to arm him with knowledge and a discussion about it. We discussed it on several occasions. Like, son, what do you... And he was excited to bring this to me. It was very late one night and it was time to go to sleep. And he asked me, "Mommy, I'm almost at page 100. Can I finish it?" Yes, of course. So go ahead.
His teacher, if you're listening, we're sorry. That was why he was late the next day. One of the many examples of why he's late in the morning.
Yeah, the boy loves reading.
Yeah.
I thank you for that. For teaching him how to read at 5 years old. And he devours books left and right. I mean, he already finished the first book of the Hardy Boys, by the way. Mm-hmm. He said, "Mama, I don't want this book anymore." "Oh, because I finished it." So he's on book 2. But yeah, so arming them with knowledge. Okay, are you getting where I'm going?
I do, but I want you to provide the counterexample. I'm sure you're working on that, of like, what would be somebody who like is doing it the way that he's describing with the bubble and the...
Okay, let's see.
And you can use social media.
Oh,
as the
yeah.
example.
So if they don't, he's saying that if they're not exposed to it, then they're going to, when they do get a hold of it, that, something could happen, something grave could happen. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So are you informing this child of the possible impacts? Or are you going to let them experience this, on the court and have it affect their, so mostly for girls, it affects their, the way that they see themselves, right? Their confidence level. And they're constantly comparing themselves to other girls, other women. And How are you going to just, hey, here it is. You can have a social media account. You can do what you will with it. Or are you going to, am I answering the question? What's a bubble?
Not really, but
Okay.
yeah, so I think I can come up with an analogy, or maybe I can help you with your analogy first,
Okay,
and then I'll
yeah.
give one analogy for myself.
Well, in a bubble
I
with
think
like no phone.
Yeah, in
no
a bubble
phone,
would be
nothing.
like, we're not even going to discuss that.
We're not going to talk about it.
Right. Like, we're going to have a phone-free house, and we're not going to talk about phones, and we're not going to, have our child exposed to phones, or even tell them what social media is, or, we're going to just have a total pristine existence with no mention of that other thing called a phone or, social media or any of that kind of stuff. Instead, that's not what we're doing. We're not exposing him to it, but we're talking about it. And to me, the best analogy for me, like that I can think of, is drugs. Okay, when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, drugs were a very big thing. And, when there was a lot of commercials on TV. Everybody remembers the classic, this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs. Yeah. So if you grew up in the 80s, But the point is that I remember in I think it was second or third grade, starting a Just Say No club with some of my friends. And we made like a flag, and we had elections, and I didn't win. And I was very upset about that because I had promised free trips to my dad's restaurants for all of our meetings. And I thought, well, that's a sure win. But apparently all the girls wanted to vote for one of their girlfriends and not for like one of the two guys that was in the club. But whatever. The point is, and I'm not salty about that at all anymore, of course. But the point is that this was a very important topic that we discussed a lot. I remember in fourth grade there being the DARE program that they had going on, and the research on that is not so great in terms of the outcomes. But to me, I thought it was interesting to learn about the negative effects of the drugs, and I thought that was useful. And for me, I think that had I been clueless and known nothing about it, I think that would have been problematic, because then it would have seemed to me as like, I'm just imagining a reality, and I'm sure this was the reality for many people growing up in the 60s and 70s, where let's say I had been exposed to drugs knowing nothing about them, and I'd tried some, and it would have been like usually marijuana, right? And the effects were mild and frankly enjoyable. And then I would have said, well, this doesn't seem to be so bad. And these were all supposedly these taboo things that we don't talk about. So maybe, I'll try some cocaine next. And after that, maybe I'll try some, methamphetamine and, so forth and so on. So the point is, like, I can imagine in a world where you're just totally protected from any discussion of drugs, that the potential impact of drugs would have been actually greater, versus like me growing up in the 80s being consistently educated about drugs and their negative effects. I felt like I had some degree of protection to the point where, there was just no way that I was ever going to get addicted to drugs as an adult. Now, there are kids who that stuff goes in one ear and out the other. And I think that may have something to do with cognitive capacity. It may have something to do with personality and temperament. It may have something to do with parenting. I'm not sure, probably all of the above. But I just think that for me, I can imagine that like the complete bubble approach, which is we're not even going to discuss drugs, like that's not even going to be a topic that ever comes up in our family. And so then you're sort of thrust out into the world with no knowledge of them, versus like some people who I think are like the people that are exposing their kids to social media at a young age are like, sure, you can have some marijuana when you're like 10, or you can smoke some cigarettes when you're like 8, or you can have some cocaine when you're 12, And I think that we would all, most of us, maybe not all, would pretty much agree that that's a bad idea, right? You don't expose your kids to drugs when their brains are still developing, right? And the reality of the matter is that brains continue to develop until age 25. The research shows very clearly that for those who try marijuana before the age of 25 are much more likely to get addicted to it than those who try it for the first time after they turn 25. And so, yeah, I would just say that, and the same is true of cigarettes, the same is true of any kind of addictive substance, that there's really a dividing line at really when the brain fully matures, which is right around age 25. The other thing I will say is the brain actually continues to grow, not just, it continues to grow until about age 16, and then it continues to develop between 16 and 25. And what we find with the drug studies is that, and this carries over to social media and cell phones and all the rest, is that if you're exposing your child to these things before they're 16, then it's almost impossible for them to quit using them. It's extremely difficult after they're 16. It creates almost like a physical addiction. And I think that's what we're seeing with regard to cell phones and early social media introduction. It's almost impossible. I mean, these children, literally, you hear these stories and you're like, oh, but literally you hear these stories of children experiencing withdrawal symptoms from not having access to their phone. Well, yeah, because you were, given a phone. It's like people who start smoking when they're 12. Good luck ever quitting, right? It's extremely difficult for them. So, we have decades of addiction research which is directly applicable to these topics, because we know that the same kind of dopamine surge that you get from drugs, you get from, scrolling on your phone. And they've actually designed the phones and they've designed social media to trigger that dopamine response because they know that it will reinforce the addictive capacity of them. So in the same way that we don't expose young children to cigarettes and alcohol and illicit drugs, we shouldn't be doing exposing children to smartphones and social media at an early age as well.
I mean, how many children nowadays are going to bed, scrolling on their phones, right before bed?
Yeah. And I think there's this assumption amongst a lot of our peers, most of whom didn't have a phone until they were, probably 18, and didn't have a smartphone until they were probably 25, and certainly were not on social media until they were probably around 30. There's this assumption that what's the big deal? They can quit any time. Hey, bartender, one more drink. It's another one of those commercials from the 80s. But the point is, you're not in the mind of someone who's been connected to this device and dependent on it during the core key developmental years of your childhood. And I think that the degree to which we are underestimating the effects of these technologies on the brain and brain development cannot be overstated. But I did have one more thing I wanted to say about what he said, but to go say what you're going to say.
Yeah,
first.
so what examples did he use? Alcohol, devices, or smartphones?
Yeah, those are the ones I remember.
So does he actually think that we bubble our kids? Is that
I think that he's arguing that our viewpoint is a conservative one that says we're going to shield our children, we're going to put a wall around them, we're going to build a bubble, we're going to protect them from the evils of society.
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, I think there's a.
But yeah, he does bring the example of alcohol up a couple times, which I think it's an ironic example because the thing I would say there is it'd be interesting to consider what was missing in those kids' upbringing that they felt the need to go totally overboard with alcohol. Mm-hmm. I think we have a very disordered relationship with alcohol in general in this country. I think the way that they do it in Europe, where there's a culture of you don't get drunk, you don't drink to excess, it's just not done. It brings shame on you and shame on your family. You have 2 drink maximum, is kind of the standard in an hour, right? And yeah, they do give diluted wine to teenagers, but which I think
people don't drink in excess just to drink in excess. There's something.
Well, it's also
always something that they're dealing with or medicating.
Right, and I would say that it's seen more as a condiment or an element of the meal there, as opposed to something that you drink in order to feel a certain way, right? It's like a accompaniment to the meal more than it is
Right.
an
Culturally, I think
intoxicant.
culturally in the U.S., we drink to unwind.
Right,
to relax, which speaks largely to
our insano culture that has us all
wake up early, drive on
wound
that
up.
concrete jungle, and go to work at 7.
Yeah.
Come home at 5 or later. Spend 1 hour with your kid before they have to go to sleep.
Yeah.
You know, make of that money.
Yeah. Yeah, the one other thing that he mentioned that I wanted to comment on, which is what he said, very interesting. To me, the most perspicacious part of this entire comment was, he says, look what happened in the past. In society, you knew someone who was 25 years old, only had an average of about 10 more years to live. People grew up faster and society developed just fine. So I think this is such an insightful comment for 2 reasons. And I think those 2 reasons are really show the difference between what society is now and what society has been in the past. And I'm going to describe what those 2 differences are. Number 1, now we have an average lifespan of about 75 years. Back then it was 35, right? So because of that, we have like a prolonged, extended childhood, which they didn't have back then, because why would you, right? Why do we have that? Well, we have that because we need to have people work from the time that they are, we need to create room in the workplace for people to work until they're at least 65, right? Well, if you are going to have people working until they're 65, you can't have a lot of 15-year-olds entering the workplace. Because if you did, then the 65-year-olds would have to retire. There wouldn't be room for them. So in order to kind of allow older people to continue to work longer, we have kept childhood going until around age 25, which again does have some developmental benefits because the brain continues to develop from 16 to 25. Now, by keeping them at school, you're keeping them out of the workforce and you're allowing an older retirement age, which keeps people busy for this longer lifespan. Number 1. Number 2, you have a scenario where because of this childhood that's extended, you have people basically delaying their maturity. And you see this. People they don't get married. Right now we have the oldest age, I think, in recorded history of marriage, first marriage. I think it's like 29, which is the oldest it's ever been. You have people delaying having children with, sort of ensuing or correlated problems with fertility. You have people, older and older grandparents. All of these factors are factoring into why we now have this extended period of maturation where it was like, yeah, you were responsible to take on a lot more responsibility at an earlier age in previous times. And that kind of leads me to, I guess, the third comment here, which is, well, why was that a workable system? It was also a workable system, not just because of the lower lifespan, but also because the amount of training needed to do low-skilled labor, which was 99% of all labor back in those days that you're describing, was considerably less. It was like, here, Bill, here, Joe, go pick up this rock, put it over there, right? It was like a lot of manual labor. It was a lot of very, very menial labor. It was a lot of very basic, dig a hole here, put a seed there, cover it up. Go plow on you know what a straight line is? Okay, great. Go plow on a straight line. Real simple things, which frankly, 99% of people can do no problem. And, and so the barrier to entry to the workforce was considerably lower. You have an 8th grade education? Awesome. You can do 98 to 99% of all jobs that we have available to us now. Again, back then. Now, we require a college degree for, I think, at least a third to maybe 40% of all jobs that are out there in the market. A high school diploma is basically a requirement, so total of 13 years of education is essentially a requirement for at least 80% of the jobs out there. So it's a very different, we've sort of, as the society has gotten older, and we now have more skilled labor that is required to do these jobs through industrial revolution and the scientific and technological revolutions, communication revolution. All of these jobs now require a lot more training. We now have extended education as well because of that. And you can't just, I'm 15, I've got my 8th grade education, I'm good to go. I'm going to start my life. Let's get married and start having kids, and I'll go work at the local lumber mill. So that is basically the main reasons why I think things have changed. Did you have something you want to say about that?
No.
Okay, but you agree with what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah, that's basically why that old model of they managed to figure it out, 200, 300 years ago. Why can't we do the same thing? Now, look, that being said, I think it's absolutely crucial to give children opportunities to do things independently. We are big believers in Montessori education, which is all about let your kid figure out things on their own. I think we've done a disservice to children by taking away things like walk to school, bike ride around the neighborhood, preferably with a buddy. But, what's another thing? Of course, if you live in a gated community, maybe just bike ride around a neighborhood, right? Giving children unsupervised play, where there's an adult that can be accessed but is not immediately watching them, which is how recess used to be. The recess used to be an opportunity for teachers to grade papers, to eat a snack, and basically to just let the kids run around and do whatever they wanted to do. And maybe you had one person that was accessible in case somebody got hurt, but other than that, it was unsupervised. Now it's like the teachers are there making sure the kids are behaving themselves and kind of monitoring, and that's not really what recess is supposed to be. So, unsupervised time to play, I think, is a crucial part of growing up and is something that I think is needed, and we need more of it. So, that's how you balance that out. It's not be a helicopter. We're not advocating being helicopter parents. In fact, I think quite the opposite.
We're tiger moms.
Yeah, or snowplow parents, or any of those kind of things. I think fundamentally we are very aware of those tendencies and are very opposed to those tendencies. What we're really describing, I think, is a middle way in between that sort of overreaction to the dangers of reality, and the other side, which is essentially the negligent parenting, which doesn't work out very well either, and it's what's called authoritative parenting, which, if you understand the parenting models that psychologists talk about, there's authoritarian parenting, which is high control, low love parenting. There's negligent parenting, which is low control, low love parenting. There's permissive parenting, which is high love, low control parenting. And there's authoritative parenting, which is what we advocate, which is high control, high love parenting, because that's really what the outcomes show works best. Interestingly enough, the outcomes are best with that group. Second, interestingly enough, is authoritarian, so low love, high control. So it turns out control a little more important than love, which is a little surprising, but anyway. And then permissive parenting, which I think a lot of people who had more authoritarian parents feel, they need to be permissive. We just need to let the kids do what they want to do and have fun, and they'll turn out fine. Turns out that that's actually sort of the third worst outcome. It doesn't work very well at all because
children are looking for structure and for you to be their guardrails, and they're looking to you as their universe.
Right.
So guide them.
Right. 100%. And then, of course, negligent parents those kids have the worst outcomes, the kids of negligent parents. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting to see what the research is on that, and we could talk more about that sometime. But I think I did want to get, because my brother sent me a response to that as well. And I think
what I mean by that is I really invite parents to think about how much they're outsourcing their child's care and forming of worldviews to the outside, like outside the family, whether it be conventional schooling or
Media,
social media or
even just media. Yeah,
corporate media.
yeah, yeah. And we talked about that before.
Or their
but
peers. It's a big one.
Oh yeah, yeah. We should see if we could get Gabor Mate on here, or maybe Gordon Neufeld to talk about hold on to your kids, because I think peer attachment is one of those things that I think is well worth a good 2-3 hours.
Absolutely.
Or more to discuss.
Mommy, I want a phone, an iPhone because my friend has one.
Yeah.
They're all judging me. They're all looking at me, and
right.
I need one to fit in.
And because how I appear to my peers is the number one most important thing in my life, apparently.
Yeah, how many parents would bend to that?
And a lot of us grew up in that mindset. And that's the irony, is that we're passing it down. But one of the things that they talk about in their book, Hold On to Your Kids, is how that disordered mindset actually is only arisen in the West in the last 70 years as a result of largely compulsory public education through age 12, or through grade 12, age 18. And that it doesn't exist in other parts of the world, and is really at the source of a lot of our country's problems. And it's one of those books that once you read it, you can't unread it. So highly recommended. We will talk about it more and hopefully have one of them on to discuss it. And I think this is a good tie-in to what my brother said in response to what we were talking about. And a lot of it is what we've just talked about, but I wanted to give him his fair due as a fellow Partovi. This is the Partovi Effect, after all. He says, I have seen this before firsthand all through college. It's actually a point I was going to make in my response to this idea of shielding your children from things that are dangerous and have social implications. At some point, it's important to work alongside your children through things and teach them why. It starts around 7 years old and becomes more and more important. His oldest daughter, my niece, at 13, believes she is grown. I remember being that age, he says. Allowing your children room to grow and protecting them without crushing their free spirit is a delicate balance. You simply have to look at our own father. He began to get his green card at age 12. So I think that's kind of a beautiful example of what we're describing to some degree. I mean, I think he encapsulates the ethos of it pretty well there. I think we may differ a little bit on some of the praxis, right, the implementation. But I think, and you may disagree, but let me know what you think. I think in terms of the ethos, that idea of finding a middle way in the balance, and I think the question really becomes, where is that balance? Where is the middle, right, in the conversation? And I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to explore what the extremes are. And I think that the middle may look a little different to some people, because some people may see it as a little more this way, a little more that way, right? And that may be their own biases or their own parenting. Of course, my brother and I had the same parenting, so it's interesting to kind of hear his take on it. But I believe that as the first child, the oldest, I kind of got maybe a stricter parenting than he did as the middle child. And so maybe that's why I have a little bit more of a tendency toward being a little more higher on the control end of that spectrum than he does. It's possible. But I think that the last point that he mentioned harkens back to what I was saying earlier about our dad, growing up in Iran, knowing that he wanted to get out of there at the time he was 12, and beginning to investigate the process. And it was a multi-year process. It wasn't until he was 15 that he was actually able to leave. But I believe from the time that he was, I think, 13, he was going down to the office, saying, what do I need to do next, to get my passport, to get my visa. And it was a multi-year process to be able to do that at that time, in the early 1960s. So, or maybe even late 50s, early 60s. So yeah, I mean, interesting to remember that. But just imagine how much both simpler and more challenging for him coming from a country like Iran in, in 1960. How difficult that would have been for a 15-year-old to figure out, how am I going to do this? Come to this country, stay with a host family, finish high school, go to college, become work for another person, eventually buy them out, start my own businesses. I mean, my dad's journey is truly like the American dream personified. And I could not have had a better example in terms of how to implement that. And really, his story is incredibly moving. I would love to have him on at some point to tell us the story, because I think everybody would enjoy hearing that. I know I would enjoy hearing it again for the, fifth or sixth time. But yeah, anything about what my brother said?
I think what he said was beautifully expressed, and I really invite parents to take a look at how that really looks like on the court for them, and to be aware, that the arrows of the 80s are not the arrows, that are coming at you in 2026.
Yeah.
The drug landscape is completely different. I mean, kids are being handed pills and then they die because they're laced with fentanyl. These are young kids. So the playing ground is very, very different. So how to actually be that, guardrail and still allow them to express their free spirit and to explore and discover the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of parents are not, they're not in touch with, really. Like the impact of all these new things, that we didn't grow up with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the impact. And now there's plenty of research coming out. And so that is my invitation, to be very aware of those bodies of research.
Well, and I think and not only that, absolutely be aware, but to the degree that you cannot be aware, be cautious. Which is to say, if it's an area where we don't really know yet, because this wasn't around when we were growing up, the precautionary principle says, until we have enough data, hold off. Don't introduce it yet. Look, we had great childhoods. We had a ton of fun. We turned out, right? These kids are not going to be deprived growing up the way we did, I mean, I'm sorry. I just don't buy that. I don't buy that argument. I think that we had a great childhood growing up in the 80s and 90s. And to me, to give that same kind of childhood to our kids is actually a gift. And frankly, I consider a balance between kind of the timeless way that kids have grown up for centuries and also exposure to some of the new technologies that gives them a little bit of the bug of oh, this is a cool thing, right? And it's new and it's technology and it's screens and it's games.
But nowhere is there, is there anybody teaching them ethics and how to utilize AI or social media? Yeah. Where are they going to get that from? AI.
The only place you're going to get that from is more AI at this point. You get AI teaching you about what you should do for AI ethics, as if you can trust that. You can trust that just about as much as you can trust that doctor, what's his name, about the Plotkin about the vaccines. It's what do you think the AI is going to tell you? Of course AI is safe for your kid. I actually asked ChatGPT, I'm like, at what age do you think it's appropriate to start introducing AI to your child? And it basically gave me a trajectory of how you do it starting at age 5. And I'm like, of course you would say that, right? It's incredibly self-serving.
Yeah, and if you're not aware, do it alongside your child. Just like I did it alongside, Ryan when he was reading The Amazing Generation.
Well, yes, and were you done?
Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that I think there's a little bit of a trap there, right? Because there is this sense of oh, well, as long as we're sitting next to the child It doesn't really matter what they're exposed to because we can explain it to them if they have questions.
That's not what I mean. I'm not talking about,
Good.
let's surf the, let's doom scroll social media together. That's not what I'm talking about.
Let's watch TikTok together, right?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, what I'm talking about is learning about the impact that these new things are having on children. That's what I'm talking about.
Looking at the research together.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I think that actually works because it reminds me of the kind of approach that, was taken around drugs when we were growing up. It's the idea of education and information and providing that instead of like, no, don't do that. It's bad for you. It's like, well, let's take a look from a place of curiosity.
And so
and then after having reviewed this research, like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Right?
So when Ryan said, Mama, he came to me with all these, these new discoveries. These CEOs don't even let their kids. And I wouldn't jump right on the bandwagon. Oh, isn't that crazy? You know what I did? I asked him, what do you think about that, son? Okay, so he further is supported in formulating his foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, just like in the ingredients. We'll go shopping. Can I have that, Mom? Okay, let's read the ingredients together. Do you think this company has your health in their best interest? He can read now. We go, no. I mean, I told you on the last episode he checks me, about fast food.
Yeah.
Okay? Mommy, we really shouldn't be eating there. Okay?
Correct.
So this stuff, it works. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a type of education that people don't talk about often, and that's why we're talking about it. It's about educating your child, really treating them like a fellow human being, and that you're in the journey alongside them and you have more knowledge and more experience and you want to share that with them, but you also want to have them discover some of it on their own so that it really feels like, oh, it's their knowledge. It's not just, oh, I got this shoved down my throat by mom and dad. And what was really cool about that book and why I really enjoyed it was that he'd come ask us, because the book prompts the child to ask his parents, his or her parents, basically to, what was it like when you were a kid? What kind of phones did you have when you were a kid? What kind of TV did you have when you were a kid? What was it like to watch a movie when you were a kid, right? And it would and we would describe to him what it was like, and he was like, wow,
Care Bears is on Prime Video, and it stops and says, we'll be back right after the break. I go, oh, son, here's where I used to have to watch through the 3 minutes of commercials.
Right.
You don't have to.
Right. Yeah. No ads for you.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. Sometimes there's like compilations of ads on YouTube, which I will show him just to see just so he can see what it was like. Because he has no conception of it, really. Because we have YouTube Premium, and so like literally there's never any ads, in our house. So not that it's like we want him to buy those products, but just so he can understand what a commercial is.
Yeah, and he knows that marketing is to influence you to buy, to be a consumer. Did I tell you that story one time? I took him to the fair, the stock show, and we were walking out. We were ready to go, and he wanted to do one more, fun house. So I said, sure. And then he saw all these booths, and he said, Mommy, they put all these booths here as we exit so that we could, they're trying to make us buy these things. I mean, I know this. I even know it, but I still want to buy these things.
Right?
Yes. And then he wanted something, and I asked him, instead of saying no, I asked him, do you think this is the best use of your money? He paused for a few seconds. He said, no, Mommy, let's move on. So to have him think about these things and empower him to make informed choices has been just a real beautiful thing to witness. Can you believe?
I can believe it.
Yeah.
I know that guy. He's my son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a ball. Yeah.
Yeah. That was fun.
And we learned, we learned together.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Well, are you complete?
I'm complete.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this very fun and engaging, enjoyable. I mean, I enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
I totally did.
I had fun today. I have fun every time, but I mean, especially this time. I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
And I am Mrs. Madi Partovi.
Oh, I didn't say the name.
Oh.
Sorry. Hold on. Thank you for joining. Oh, actually, before I even say that, please email us questions, comments, doubts, feedback, concerns, pushback, requests for us to be on your podcast. Please don't request to come on this podcast. If we want you on the podcast, we'll call you, we'll text you, we'll email you. But if you'd like us on your podcast, by all means, send us an invitation. The Partovi Effect at gmail.com. Again, that's the Partovi Effect at gmail.com. And for this time on the Partovi Effect, I am Dr. Ryan Partovi.
And I am Mrs. Madi Partovi. Thank you for subscribing, and thank you for being part of our community.
Be well.